Okay. Sounds good. So before I introduce you, Laura, do you want to make your announcement?
Yes, so we are actually using closed captioning and live transcription on this recording. And so if it gets a little just too busy or irritating for you all, at the bottom of your screen, you can see your taskbar for Zoom, and there'll be a little button that says CC on it for closed captioning. If you click on that, you can turn off the closed captioning for your viewing. Okay, thanks.
All right. So today we have the distinct privilege of hearing from Dr. Ellen Selkie. So she, in addition to being the extraordinaire who keeps me up to date on all culture, I learned a lot about her. So she apparently really likes cold places. She received her BA from Denison in Ohio before moving to the University of Wisconsin, where she received both her MD and MPH. She then went and did her training in adolescent medicine at Seattle before coming to Ann Arbor to join the Division of Adolescent Medicine, where she has a particular focus on adolescent mental health. And then her research focuses on the understanding how adolescents use digital technology in both pro-social and anti-ways, interact through social media, or how peer interactions through social media could impact health outcomes in adolescents and young adults. So I am very excited about the talk today. I find Ellen's work very fascinating, and I always something not only about her research, but also learn about technology, because I am not very trendy. So thank you very much, Ellen, for speaking to us today.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Courtney, and thank you all for being here today. I know that we all probably have gotten a little bit more of our filled in social media than we used to because of the pandemic. But it certainly is an interesting time to be on social media with so many political implications. But I am not going to talk about that today. I'm going to talk about how it works in adolescence, and really talking about the ways that my team uses social media to look at adolescent behavior. And I would say, and so I'm going to focus on just one study that our team is doing. So let me share my slides. Sorry, I did that in the wrong order here. Okay. All right, we can all see my slides, right?
Yes.
Okay. So my lab is called the Lmfao Lab. We like acronyms in our lab, and so what that stands for is Learning More from Adolescents Online. And so that is the point of my talk. So so just sorry, a little bit of background about me is that I'm an adolescent medicine pediatrician. So I am pediatrics trained, and then adolescent medicine is an additional 3-year fellowship. And as Courtney said in her introduction, I have had a long-standing interest in social media and adolescent health. When I was in fellowship, I did a lot of work on cyberbullying and mental health. And so I'll sort of talk about how that played into my journey to this research study. So in terms of disclosures, so I am on a scientific advisory board for YouTube Kids, but I'm not really going to be talking about YouTube or really tech design, which is sort of the context of the advisory panel. So it's adjacent, but not necessarily relevant to this talk. So I'll give a little bit of background about adolescent social media use in general, and then we'll move into the study. So what is the deal? So, you know, as we all probably know, teens are incredibly connected. In a survey, so this survey has not been done for this year yet, but the Pew Internet and American Life survey in 2018 is really where I like to go for my metrics for teens. And so over 95% of teens are using the internet daily. Almost half are online almost constantly, and I suspect that this number is much higher, both in terms of throughout time and during the pandemic. So as of last measurement, the most popular platforms among adolescents are Snapchat, Instagram, and YouTube. But I do think that TikTok has been rapidly climbing the ranks. And so, that will definitely be up there in the top 3 to 4 at next measurement. In terms of how kids access social media, so most teens have access to a smartphone, and actually more kids have access to a smartphone than they do to a desktop or laptop. Tablets are also in this category of, so it seems that smartphones are the most common way that teens are accessing the internet and social media. So when you're looking at what specific platforms, I mentioned the top 3 already, but you can see that there is a diversity of platforms that teens use in terms of social media, and most teens are regularly using multiples. So, you look at the bar chart on the left, and you can see how many people use these platforms with YouTube. For the captioning, I'll read this. So YouTube, Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, Reddit, or none is the order of use. And then when you talk about what do you use most often, the number 1 becomes Snapchat, followed by YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook, and minimally for Twitter, Tumblr, and Reddit. So I definitely show this slide, and I always like to point out the Facebook number. So 51% of teens still do use Facebook. It's not dead. And that will become relevant when I talk about our study too, in terms of Facebook content. So, and this is just going a little bit further into the Facebook use. So teens from lower income homes are more likely to use Facebook than teens from higher income households. So specifically households making less than $30,000 a year, 70% of those kids use Facebook, compared to 36% of folks in a 75K or more home. And then when we talk about what they're actually doing, so a lot of social media profiles are very highly curated. So this was a survey from Pew that asked more specifically about ways that teens sort of modified their profiles to present a specific image through their social media feeds. So you can see that over half of teens, after they posted something, would either delete or edit that post. Over half will delete comments that other people make, and then untagging oneself. So if somebody posts a photo that has you in it and tags you, but you don't want to be tagged and found in that photo, they'll untag themselves. Almost a third of kids have deleted a social media account, and there's a smaller 19% number of kids who regretted something that they posted online. So it's definitely, I think, when I first started studying social media, there's very much a sort of tone of that the internet and social media were sort of the Wild West, where kids were posting whatever and publicly, and that they just didn't understand that everybody could see everything that they posted. But I do think that narrative has changed in terms of reputation management. So teens are very aware of who can see what in their profiles, and so they take active steps to present a certain image on social media. So when we get to, so that's just sort of an overview of how the research shows that teens use social media. In terms of why I care about it as a researcher is because of behavioral influences. So, developmentally, we know that adolescence. Adolescence is a time where peer behavior is much more influential than anything adults tell them, and so that's developmentally appropriate in terms of sort of finding figuring out who you are and where you fit in the world, and wanting to be normal or fit in with your peers. And so peer influence is huge. We also know historically that the media has a huge influence on youth. Well, it has a huge influence on everyone's behavior, but in terms of youth behavior, that's been shown in multiple studies, whether that's TV or advertising, or music. And so when you combine those two things, media and peer interaction, you have exactly what social media is. So there's no question that things that kids do or see on social media have an influence on them. And it's sort of not really clear to me still how much is the social media itself in terms of its design. There certainly are some design elements of social media platforms that are made to increase engagement. But I hesitate to blame social media for all of the influence, because really I in some ways I see social media as just another place where developmentally appropriate teen behavior happens. That being said, I certainly also know that a lot of the social media environment is a place where young people are sharing a space with adults, and that really isn't something that we've seen before in our society, and how, and in terms of impact on adolescent development. Like, teens often throughout history have been able to find ways to have private spaces away from adults, and I think that's possible on social media, but not as apparent on how to do. And so I think that's an interesting aspect of what we're looking at in terms of the ways that young people's ideas and identity are shaped by people that historically they wouldn't necessarily have been influenced by. So as I said, if we're looking at it from a positive standpoint, I think social media interactions can help adolescents develop identity. So for multiple reasons. One is there's a way to explore your identity and try on different identities in a less permanent way. And that can include sexuality, gender identity, values, beliefs, which, partially still values and beliefs partially still come from, parents and schools, but there's just much more access to a diverse array of values and beliefs on social media. Especially I think for young people, we talk about in the adult world about the bubble, the social media bubble that we have and that we develop, where it sort of becomes groupthink. But I think that, just as adolescents' brains are somewhat malleable, there is a little bit more exploration, I would say, in terms of exploring other people's values and beliefs, which can help you develop empathy and social competence. And I would say experiencing relative privacy from adults is, like I mentioned in the last slide, very user dependent. So, and I do think that the reputation management comes along with that in terms of teens knowing who is viewing their content and why. There's an interesting anthropologist who has talked with teens also about the sort of expectation of privacy, even though their content is technically public. So it's sort of like if a person is like kind of chatting on Twitter with their friends, and then a random like adult butts in, that's like still seen as an invasion of privacy, even though on paper it's not private at all. So an interesting sort of perception of how privacy works for these kids. So, and the big question is whether social media is melting everyone's brains. So does social media cause depression, loneliness, decreased empathy, society, burning down? I think that the literature has mixed results. So there are several very prominent articles that have come out in recent years using data from Monitoring the Future, which show a parallel rise in social media use, along with a parallel to a rise in depressive symptoms, decreased socio-emotional well-being, and so it's basically a correlational evidence, which is one of our weakest forms of evidence. But, you know, I think that's the bottom right corner here is another example, a satirical example of a correlational analysis that, you know, as organic food sales have gone up, so has the rate of autism. So do we really think that organic food causes autism? No, we don't think that. We know that there's much more nuance to that. And so I think that the social media and well-being question is not as, you know, it's definitely not as ridiculous as the autism and organic food connection, but I do think we need to interpret those results with caution. And I also think that sort of understanding what social media provides access to, whether that has anything to do also with the effects that we're seeing, the proposed effects that we're seeing. So is it access to and exposure to more violence, and you know, in terms of like discrimination and you know, like violence against people that look like you. So there's a whole body of literature about vicarious experiences on social media in which, so, you know, for example, if a young person who identifies as transgender sees a lot of anti-trans sentiment on social media, and they start to think, well, so society hates me, and they are, you know, their mood is affected because of that. Is it the social media itself that has, you know, caused them to be more depressed, or is it the fact that they are able to see other people's opinions? Is it some internal factor by virtue of like that person, you know, being specifically vulnerable? I think there's just a lot of questions that do not necessarily that are not really taken into account when we use these correlational analyses, right? And so I just think it's more complex, but there's, of course, in the popular press, if it bleeds, it leads philosophy definitely applies to social media, I think, which is where this meme up top comes from. So if we blame depression completely on technology and social media, what we're missing is the public schools and all of the other things that are going on that may be affecting depression as well. So with that lens, so what I hope that I've conveyed is that sort of my outlook towards social media as a researcher is coming at it from a strengths approach, as opposed to a deficits model where we say that social media, people are being bullied and they're sexting, and you know, there's all this bad behavior and they're addicted, and all of these things are leading to badness. I acknowledge that there are these associations that have been found in the literature. I also think that social media will not go away. And so I think the next step is understanding how we can, how we can find the positive aspects of social media and potentially amplify those to, turn this correlation around to improve adolescent well-being. And so that's where the study that I'm going to talk about comes in. So this is a study that is funded by my K23 award from NICHD, which I am just starting year 3 about a month ago. And so what I'm going to talk about in this part of the talk is really with an eye toward what our methods have been and how those have evolved, because we are still in active data collection, but I think there are a lot of lessons learned that I would like to talk about, because I think that a lot of the things that we're doing was a lot of trial and error and is unique and innovative in this space. So onward. So just to start with the specific aims of my K when I wrote it are that, so again, coming at it from a strengths-based approach and also stepping back and thinking about sort of a range of typical behaviors. So I said before that my work in fellowship was very focused on cyberbullying and mental health, specifically depression and alcohol use disorders. And so what I realized through doing that work for a few years was that, first of all, cyberbullying is very difficult to define depending on who you ask and what research definition you use. And so I thought, well, if it's so difficult to define, why not look at just at a spectrum of behaviors as opposed to applying specific criteria to say this was a cyberbullying incident. And I also thought about sort of when you think about a range of normative behaviors, I thought about, what about pulling back from depression and saying, what are the sort of socio-emotional contributors to depression that we can examine, sort of, again, moving upstream and looking at what is a spectrum of typical behavior in adolescence. So that's sort of the lens through this. So the first aim was to identify styles of social media peer interaction among adolescents at age 13, and then also test the hypotheses that better childhood self-regulation is associated with more adaptive social media interaction styles. And then the third aim was to test hypotheses that adaptive social media interaction styles are associated with better socio-emotional well-being indicators after 2 years. And so this will all make more sense when I talk about it in the next slide. So the central premise of the Smurf study is understanding the progression of behavior from early to mid-childhood through adolescence, and specifically at the time when social media platforms become major venues for people to communicate with their peers. And then the hope is that this work will lay foundations for future research in the interest of, again, tipping the scale toward a more pro-social approach to social media. So this is my conceptual model in which we have childhood self-regulation as the first thing before kids are using social media, and how does that play into the ways that they communicate on social media, and how does then that communication relate to later well-being. So the way we are doing this, so my primary mentor for my K is Julie Looming, who's developmental behavioral pediatrics. And she, about 10 years ago, started recruiting a cohort of young people from Head Start. So the initial ABC study was recruiting mother-child dyads from Head Start. And the purpose of the initial purpose of the cohort was to assess behavioral contributors to feeding, to feeding behaviors. And so with an eye toward eventually, how does that contribute to obesity? So it wasn't a study recruiting obese children or parents, but it was sort of, catching from the beginning, are there behavioral contributors? So why that's relevant is because there's all this behavioral data from these children about what their temperament was like when they were 4 years old and 8 years old, and what their sort of behavioral difficulties and strengths were. So, in a auspicious way, around the time I started my K, were turning 13 years old. So we felt like this was a good opportunity to get the band back together. None of these participants had participated in studies since they were, I think, like 11-ish. It had been over a year since any studies had been conducted in this population, but we still had all their contact information. And so so I proposed to follow them some more. So the recruitment is rolling because the recruitment for the initial cohort was rolling. So when the participants turn 13 years old, is when we start trying to contact them. And we started about 1.5 years ago. So what we do is we have multiple different contact methods, phone, sometimes email, and we have multiple, and we try the tracking longitudinally over time with the study. Part of that was, getting alternate contacts and, so that because these are low-income families, there's a lot of moving that happens, that it seems to have happened among these families, and so sometimes difficult to reach. And so I think one of the beautiful things that I felt like I was given with this cohort was this very rich, retention effort that had happened over 10 years that allowed families to be, really familiar with, participating in research at U of M. There was a sort of base of trust because the families had had, good experiences with prior ABC studies. So it was nice. It's been nice to be able to come into that setting and call and be like, I'm with the ABC study, and the family already knows that this is hopefully, still feels that this is a trusted person to talk to. So so when the research staff calls, so usually we've been able to get hold of the families by phone, but Lily, my head recruiter, will tell you that it is there are multiple attempts made. And so, if we can't reach them by phone, we'll try to do text messaging, emailing, we send postcards. We have stopped short of in-home visits. We had talked about that before the pandemic, but we ended up not implementing that, and I don't think that we would now. But we've been able, we get hold of them. And the thing that's a little bit different about our study is that, so prior, the recruitment had been, like I said, for mother-child dyads, and and subsequent studies also took into account like maternal input in survey completion, as well as child activity. And so this was the first one where it was just the child. So that was a little bit different in terms of who we were studying. So obviously for 13-year-olds, parental consent is still important, but child assent was also obtained. And so if you agreed to participate in the study, this is what you would do. So on the first call where the person consented and enrolled, we would ask for their any accounts that they had on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And while they're on the phone, send a friend request or follow request, and follow the person on all of the social media accounts that they told us. And so this would include private accounts. And so we have a dummy or like a study social media profile for each Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter that is designed to look innocuous. Like, it doesn't say like Smurf Study with a U of M logo. It's just, sort of a dummy account that we follow from, so that it's not super obvious that the participants are participating in research. Because, one thing that teens will often do is take a look at who is following who. And we wanted to sort of minimize, or we wanted to preserve privacy about participation as much as possible. So we follow them for 2 years. We don't interact with them on social media. If they request to follow us, we do not accept their follow requests. And so it's purely just passive observation. And every 6 months, we contact them again to update any social media profile information. So if they've gotten a new profile, if they've deleted one, or they've changed their username, we can get that updated information. And then this graphic below shows other things that they'll do. So every 6 months, they get a survey, and the sort of length of the call and survey is sort of helps us decide what the incentive is. But you can see that the kids make a decent amount of money over a 2-year period, which of course has enhanced our ability to recruit. Yeah, so our progress to date. So initially when the cohort was recruited, there were almost 400 participants. When I wrote the K, there were 330 active, and that was from a year prior when the last study was done. So in the K, I proposed to do 150, and so we currently have 130 enrolled, which is, you say you want to recruit 150. I would have been okay with 100, and now we're at 130, and it's amazing. And it's clearly directly due to my staff, because this, like I say, it's a population that, even though we have this trust from prior research, they're still really hard to reach. And, it's really we've been through a lot of iterations about like when to call and how to contact and things like that. And so I'm really proud of how just our recruitment. So when we look at the actual sample, so we have so many demographics to collect information about, but so we have 55% female population. We asked about sexual orientation in multiple ways, and so you can see the breakdown there. It's a relatively diverse cohort, with only 60% identifying as white. And so I don't really know what else to say about that, but you can just take a look at the numbers and I'll move on.
How does that compare to like what we know about adolescents? Especially in terms of like the sexual orientation.
Mm-hmm. What was your question, Courtney?
How does that like compare to a more general population?
Yeah, good question. So honestly, I would say that based on these results, like it seems to skew a little bit more queer than what traditionally surveys have said. But I also don't know how long people have been measuring so many different sexual orientations. So that's my caveat. So I think that we have limited our categories enough that in like larger scale studies, that I don't know that it accounts, like it's a little bit like comparing apples to oranges is basically what I think I'm saying. But I would say that what's striking to me is that heterosexual the proportion is less than I would have expected based on sort of the general population. So did I answer your question? Sort of.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Other demographic things, so in terms of parental education, so only 29% of parents have completed a college degree. The vast majority of participants have free and reduced lunch. About half live in a household where the parents are together. So just to give you a sense of the psychosocial milieu. In terms of the social media platforms that they have, so 91 of the 130 have Facebook. A few more have Instagram and Twitter. There are 26. And so when we look at whose profile, like who has only one profile, so 25 folks had Facebook as their only social media platform. Instagram, 34, it was their only, and Twitter, there were none. You could see the sort of diversity of platforms that the kids have. In terms of, I remember when I presented this really briefly a few weeks ago at the thing, somebody asked me about a Finsta. And so for those who don't know, so you have Insta and Finsta. And so Finsta is short for fake Insta, but it's actually the opposite. It's like the real, like, thing that you show to like people who are closer to you, I think. And like the non-Finsta is more of a public facing, like more kind of curated profile. And so, you know, we asked about that. I would say that, Lily, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I would say that most of the Instagram profiles were considered to not be Finstas. I also would note that most people only had one profile on each of these, but there were some folks who have multiple, as usually Instagram, that they would have multiple Instagram profiles. I think I saw somebody had 5 different Instagram accounts. So there was a range. So, and of course, we don't know if people have multiple accounts, if they just didn't tell us about some of them, you know, which I'll talk about in limitations. So, and in terms of like what devices they use, so you can see that this is by number, not percentage, but you can see that it's consistent with the other, the national data that I showed you. Smartphone was the most common device that people were using. But you can see that, you know, you can infer that many households had multiple internet connected devices. Okay, so that was sort of the overview of our population. And so then let's talk about that first aim. So how do we determine social media peer interaction style? So the graceful way to say this is that it is an iterative process in terms of our methodology. And so I'm going to go through the different ways that we trialed different methods. So basically what we're looking at when we're deciding like what is our data that we're looking at. So one of the things that each participant does is, or that we do with each participant, is that every 6 months, so every 6 months they get a call to update their profile and get another survey in REDCap. And so then once we've confirmed that they are still, you know, participating in the study, they still have social media, what we do is we retroactively pull the previous month's data from their social media accounts. And what I mean by that is there are multiple ways we do this. So so Danny is our computer guy. And so he has written scripts, computer scripts to scrape Instagram and Twitter, and basically be able to download certain aspects of each participant's social media data. So that gets put into a spreadsheet and includes metadata, so the date and time of a post, any text that's associated with the post. We decided not to collect images themselves just for privacy reasons, but we can describe the images. And then any comments that are made on that post. So it's available to us for Instagram and Twitter, but it's definitely a constantly evolving process because Twitter and Instagram, the companies, like very frequently change their code, right? And so we have to be constantly checking whether our computer scripts are talking together so that we can actually get the data. So that happens. And then for Facebook does not make their API, which is the interface that allows the programs to talk to each other. Facebook does not make that API available. And so we can't actually like scrape data from Facebook. We have to do it by hand. And so, and because of all those reasons, so, you know, people might ask, well, why aren't you just collecting all of their social media data? And this is really a resource limitation issue. I mean, we just, we don't have the time or resources to go through two full years worth of social media posts for a participant. So we chose to do this 1 month block every 6 months. And so, so we get this downloaded, but, and then for Facebook, basically research staff will go into a person's Facebook feed by hand and extract the posts and what the text is and things like that, to sort of have a record of what specifically the participants have posted in terms of content, and also if anyone has commented on that content. So we do not, we don't click through any friends' profiles because they have not been consented to be in the study. And so what we have available to us to look at is other people's comments. And we also do not click through to see what our participant has commented on other people's stuff. Because again, other people's content would not be covered under this study, if that makes sense. So, and so what we're thinking about then when we're thinking about this social media peer interaction style is that is the data that we are looking at. So we're looking at the images, text posts that our participants posted, any publicly viewable or publicly in terms of viewable to us comments that other people have done. And so it's like, well, how do we wrangle that into something that can actually be rigorously tested? So the initial idea when I wrote the K was that we were gonna look at the specific comments from peers, and we were gonna code those, and then the codes would be able to be we would quantify the codes, plug them into a cluster analysis, and then we would be able to form clusters of like archetypes that would be the variables in our analyses. Okay, so that's where we're coming from here. So, but in order to get those quantified codes, we need a coding scheme. So what we first did was we decided let's code for certain behaviors. So one of my mentors in fellowship had did a longitudinal study about alcohol use displays on Facebook. And so what they did was they looked at people's posts, and they had a scale that was the alcohol use disorders inventory, and that had like 8 items. And so they would look at a post and say, do any of the 8 items from the audit apply to this? So I thought, well, maybe we can adapt this to behaviors, peer behaviors. And so we found this pro-social, antisocial behavior and sports scale, and we took each of those behaviors and said, can we translate this into a code book for our social media content? And so what I have here, and so the benefit of that would be if we found certain words that were able to be coded as a certain behavior, we could ultimately plug that into a natural language processing program and be able to basically automate the coding process. Okay, that was the dream. So here we have just it's a fake Instagram post, but we have what we might be looking at, and we have this photo, and then we have somebody comments on it, and then the original poster and another person comment on that. So that's the thread. So for method 1, we said, okay, so this sports scale has inclusion and criticism as potential behaviors. And so we then defined what those things meant so that we could apply it to any of the content that we saw. So you can see that the conversation below, we would apply these codes to each one of the comments that was put on the picture. So however, so there were some challenges. So first of all, we had trouble figuring out what the unit of analysis should be. So should it be an individual comment, if we're going back up here? So should it just be like each one of these that's coded, or should it be this entire conversation? Like, what is the overall like behavior that's being demonstrated in this conversation? So that was one point, and that we couldn't agree on. And just in general, applying the codes books, the codes are pretty subjective, and so we just it was a disaster trying to get reliability between coders, because unlike, with the alcohol use disorders inventory, where it's like, this person is drinking or they aren't drinking, which even that can sometimes be up for interpretation. This was like, is this person criticizing someone else? Like, that can be very subjective. And so we had a really hard time getting to reliability on it. So we thought, okay, well, so what if we simplify it and collapse all of these behaviors into just pro-social and antisocial and maybe a neutral category? So then we tried the second method. So we had this sample, so we said, okay, these are the behaviors that we're grouping into pro-social and antisocial categories. And then we're going to apply them as such to this conversation. So, in this conversation, so somebody says, you're so bad at this. And then the poster responds, look who's talking, let's play and see who can talk. So we categorize the participants' response as antisocial. And because it was, sort of a critical and sort of argumentative comment. So we had better reliability when we collapsed those down. So we had a coder agreement that reached as high as 86.6%. But we also felt that it was now sort of too simple in terms of we could say that something was pro-social or antisocial, but it just seemed like there were nuances and other behaviors that just weren't really easily classified, but they seemed important to determining what a person's communication style would be. So we decided to scrap it and take a totally different approach, which is what we're doing now. So what we're using right now is called digital ethnography. So ethnography is a well-known qualitative method. Sort of the traditional ethnography that anthropologists use would be, you go into the Amazon rainforest and live with a tribe for 2 years, and you write down your observations, and you've really immersed yourself in this culture and you write about it. So that's sort of the analogous thing in the digital sphere is really immersing yourself in someone's social media content. And so the way that we do it on our team is that we have 2 coders who, for each participant, who immerse themselves in their social media accounts and record their field notes and reflections. And we do this periodically, and I actually think of it like, as a clinician, to me, it feels sort of like every 6 months you have a patient visit, and then your notes, you take your notes on how the patient's doing, and then over time, you compare those notes. So we try to have continuity for the coders with each participant so that they can really see and comment on how this participant has evolved in their communication over time. And we have multiple surveys that we give the youth that we use as collateral information as well. So specifically, every 6 months, the participants complete what we call a life event survey. And so that asks, like, did you break up with a boyfriend? Did you move? Did your pet die? Things that might influence what the content is that they post. And so we look at those surveys to say, oh, it's interesting that, like, this person, their grandma died, and, for this period on social media, their posts seem to get more sort of dark and sad. So and so then what the plan is that we look at the field notes, and then we look for patterns in behavior. So almost sort of like thematic coding of the field notes. And through that, we're going to form these typologies of behavior, which that will be what goes into our analyses with our survey data. So this is just an example of the field notes template. So you can see that for each phase, the coder will observe. They look at the posts themselves, the comments on those posts. What is the general look of the profile? Like, what is their profile information that they say? What do you think this person is like based on their social media profile? And then what questions might you have? And I just have a couple of examples of ways that we're starting to categorize the participants. And so just in terms of example behaviors, so there are some folks, and so these numbers are participant numbers. So there are some folks who seem like a lot of their social media content is like promoting their own content or work, sort of like they're trying to become an influencer, for example. Other people are reposting, memes or TikToks or tweets, not their own content, but they're sort of sharing other people's internet content. There are a number of participants who, especially on Facebook, the participant themselves is not super active in creating content, but they're often like tagged in posts that their parents have made. And then an example of how we use the survey data. So one of our surveys asks about sort of uses and gratifications that participants get from social media. And there's a scale that says, how often do you use XYZ? And there are some participants who they report that they use social media regularly, but that is not reflected in their content. And so, to us, it's like, are we missing data? What is the reason for this discrepancy? But for right now, we're just noting that there is a discrepancy. In terms of surveys, so at the beginning and end of the study, they take a battery of socio-emotional well-being indicators, which are listed here. I mentioned before that every 6 months they tell us about life events, and then we have sort of single time point surveys that are sort of things that we're interested in as covariates, so uses and gratifications, what are their attitudes about technology and social media. We have our most recent wave, we have been asking about sort of positive and negative experiences on social media. And then we also have an interesting, our second to last wave is just starting in terms of like, this would be the 18-month follow-up. We put in a survey about feedback about doing social media research with the eye towards thinking, well, if we want to do something like this again in the future, what would be the feedback that young people would have for us? So,
Ellen, this is Kevin.
Yeah.
I have a quick question about the surveys.
Yeah.
Earlier on, you said surveys were administered in REDCap. Is that correct?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Can you just say, or forgive me, repeat if you already said, just a little bit about the mechanics of that? So, for example, if you're firing off these surveys in periodically in REDCap, is it a link to a survey that the participants conduct on or complete rather on a tablet, or is it like mobile friendly and they do these on their phone? How does that work?
Great question. Yeah. So every 6 months we do give them a call first because we want to update their social media accounts. And so at that call, the participants are asked how they would like to receive the survey, and then we send them a link either through text message or through email, and then so they can just take it from whatever device they have. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it sure does. Just sort of anecdotally or off the top of your head, do you have any sense of the preference direction? Like I just sort of think that adolescents, email is like, a hammer and chisel, Stone Age kind of stuff. But are they using email or is it all like text, using it on their phone basically?
That is a good question for Lily. Lily, are you here?
Yes, I am. Can you actually repeat it?
I'm trying to get a sense of whether or not the general preference is for your participants to actually opt for email or to go with a text link. I'm just trying to get a vibe for like what the participants are preferring in terms of how they get their survey.
Sure. It's definitely text message is the biggest preference, although sometimes, if the participants don't actually own phones yet, sometimes they will just defer to their parents' phone, but sometimes they'll also just use their own email addresses, but it's definitely, not as popular as the text message option.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, no
And
problem.
we generally we push those through using Google Voice for text messaging. So in case you're wondering about how we do that.
All right, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah. So pitfalls, I know I only have a couple of minutes. Limitations. So we know that we are missing out by not being able to study Snapchat. You know, as you saw, is a main platform for young people, and we are not alone in sort of our frustration of not really knowing how to study Snapchat content because of its ephemeral nature, where it gets deleted, and even if you screenshot it, then the user is notified that it's been screenshotted. So Snapchat is a black box. We also don't know if there are accounts that are being concealed from us, not intentionally, but the kids are like, I don't want you to see this, which is what the meme, the original meme said, your parents can follow you on social media if you tell them you don't have one and have a private account. There's also private content, so direct messages, things like that. And so we are asking about all these things on our follow-up survey. Like, if you knew your data were kept private, would you allow research to look at Snapchat, DM, stuff like that? You know, recruitment, again, hard to reach population. We're very lucky that we have the established ABC, but I think it's a pretty unique situation. And I think that in general, the sort of pitfall of this sort of work, the social media work, is me search is very strong in this area. So everybody uses social media. All reviewers use social media, and all reviewers, well, not all reviewers, but many reviewers have teenagers. And so I think that it's difficult for us to, for us as researchers and potentially reviewers to maintain objectivity and not overly apply one's personal experiences with social media to, you know, the science. So, but all of these things have to do with what the future directions are. So my hope is that we will be able to eventually figure out how to study Snapchat and direct messages, and really get some more insight into what makes adolescents sort of open to you know, sharing this stuff for research versus not. I think you know, replicating this in a future sample, like a larger sample with a more sort of socioeconomically diverse sample, is another next step. So there's a lot of ways that we can go. So I just want to thank my amazing team, Victoria, Lily, and Danny, who really are responsible for all of these things that I've presented, and NICHD, who funded it. So that is all. And we're right at time, so I apologize, but I am able to take questions.
Thank you so much, Ellen. That was awesome. I always love hearing from you because it's so unique and different from anything else I've ever heard. So awesome time.
Ellen, thanks for sharing that. I have a question. I'm just curious if any of the social media providers are open to engaging in research. Now, I've been surprised that Kate Spector-Baghdadi has been able to partner with 23andMe, and they've really been very really generous in sharing their data with her, which I find surprising, but I think is a really crucial opportunity moving forward. So just curious if that is a possibility, if you've had any of those conversations.
Yeah, so I would say that with social media companies, it's pretty difficult. You know, I can't remember if I feel like back in the day with a different study that we did, for example, we had tried reaching out to Tumblr to see if like with a question about collaboration, and we never got a response. I think that, you know, I would say there are various social media companies that are under a lot of fire. And I think the overwhelming attitude is that researchers would somehow make that worse. They would expose negative things or something if they were to share their data. And so I think, yeah, so they don't want to play. There's also been a couple of controversial, like there was a study several years ago now, like out of, I think it was Columbia with, I call it the Facebook mood manipulation study, which was basically like these researchers at Columbia collaborated with Facebook. And what they did was it was like a randomized situation where they took users who were posting sort of negative content and amplified that content in people's feeds using their algorithm. And then the other group, it was like they amplified more positive comment that their friends were posting. And then what they found was that the people in the arm who had more negative content presented to them tended to post more negative content themselves, and vice versa. So an interesting finding, but there was no transparency to the actual users that this was being done. And so the concern was that like they were manipulating people's moods theoretically without their consent. And so yeah, I think that put back the research industry
Yeah, it's interesting though, because I just, the work that you're doing is so innovative, but I just so feel your pain with this like archaic consent process that you need to use to get, participants into your study. And at the same time, like all of these platforms are free, and any of us that participate on them, like basically we're just, we've consented to everything already. So it seems like, why not share some of their data for research? So anyway.
Like we're not the ones that you need to be worried about, And I do think too that a pitfall of like the APIs and the scripts that we write is that, I mean, so Instagram and Twitter, they're the reason why their APIs are public is for advertisers. So like for advertisers to be able to, discern certain profiles of users and then direct advertising toward them. So we are using as researchers that because that's all we have. But I think we are also like being grouped into advertisers is not a good thing for us in terms of like how much people want to share the data. So. Other questions?
Great job. Kevin, did you get all your questions answered? I just realized that you had texted me or messaged me privately.
Yes, Ellen.
Okay.
And
Yeah, okay.
answered my question. Thank you.
Good.
All right. Well, thank you so much. This was awesome.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good
Good
rest
job,
of the day.
Ellen.